What new wrinkles is Ryan Grubb going to be bringing to the Seahawks from Montlake? We've got a special guest in Danny Kelly here to break it all down in our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in nearby Gig Harbor, Washington, or over in Jakarta, Indonesia. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We're fired up to welcome Danny Kelly of The Ringer back to the podcast. And Danny gets the special honors of opening our training camp preview this year. We're going to be breaking down a bunch of key storylines heading into the 2024 season, which is certainly going to be an eventful one with all the changes that have happened in the Pacific Northwest. Before we get to that, make sure to check out FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. As I just mentioned a moment ago, Danny, we greatly appreciate having you on every time that you grace your presence on this podcast. And you get the honors of being the first person to jump on and break down a key storyline for the Seattle Seahawks heading into training camp.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite. This is always fun. This is the time of year where we start to kind of like turn the page on the draft and really look to the season. So super exciting. Obviously, this is a brand new regime for the Seahawks, and so there's a lot of huge questions.
The fun thing about this is we were trying to cater these storylines to all of our guests, what they were interested in. And when I reached out to you, you immediately said Ryan Grubb, this new offense coming from Washington. And so we're going to start off with the essential question here, more of a big picture before we dive into specifics. But who Seahawk fans be expecting with Ryan Grubb coming to town? And I'm not going to really say coming to town is the right verbiage. Right. I guess he was in Tuscaloosa for like 6 minutes, but he's back in Seattle. What new wrinkles are you anticipating that we are going to see based on what we saw the last few years at Washington and just in general, what you know about Ryan Grubb?
Yeah, I mean, I think big picture, when I pictured this offense, it's a little bit more spread out, vertical attack, just a little bit more high flying, I guess is the really generic term that I would use. Like when you watched the Washington offense last year, it was, a lot of vertical shots down the field, letting their receivers make plays, like giving a chance for the receivers to make plays. And I could see that kind of being a, focal point for the Seahawks offense this year. The other thing, that comes to mind, and this is something that's always been super frustrating watching the Seahawks over the years, is like a really diverse screen game, really creative, diverse screen game. I remember seeing like they were doing middle screens, to running or to receivers, little delayed screens, things like that kind of like kept defenses on their heels. So I'm really excited to see, kind of what kind of how creative they can get with the screen game, because this has been sort of the bane of the Seahawks existence over the few years. I know that there's been stretches where they've been pretty good at screens, but for the most part, one of the worst screen teams in the NFL, and that's always been frustrating to me. So that's a big part of what I'll be hoping they kind of like break out this year.
Well, and let me just kind of reiterate what Corbin said to start off the show, Danny, and thank you so much for joining us. It's kind of funny. There's a lot of folks out there that the very first time that they saw DK Metcalf on the field and they saw this number 14, they thought that was the first DK associated with the Seahawks, not this gentleman here, Danny Kelly. Well, I've been following Danny's stuff on The Ringer, previously SB Nation, Field Goals. Done a lot of great work for a long time. So thank you again for joining us.
Means a lot. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to kind of get back to this whole idea of just, Ryan Grubb obviously making that transition from the University of Washington and, like Scott Huff and like Jay Harbaugh, like Pete Carroll before them, just making that switch from the college game to the NFL game. And I'm just curious. I think that can be an advantage. I think that you can, always have an eye towards developing the players right now who are going to be your breadwinners, but also developing the young players. I think sometimes you get the these, old fogey kind of coaches sometimes that aren't going to be developing their freshmen, their sophomores, so to speak. And so I'm just curious, do you think that is something that is going to help Ryan Grubb in his ascent to the NFL, and specifically at the quarterback position? Look, obviously we're all excited about the way Geno Smith might fit into to Ryan Grubb's offense, but also Sam Howell. So again, how do you view Ryan Grubb's experience at the college level actually being helpful for him in his jump to the NFL this year?
I mean, the first thing that I think of, and this is sort of general for all college coaches, is they just don't have as much time to install things as like people in the pro game do. These players, especially now with the transfer portal, are in and out every year. It seems like there's just, and especially if you're a really good player, you're only going to have him for 2 years probably. And so I think it's just simplifying the language, being able to, and I think you have to be able to at this level, be able to relate to the players and know how they learn best. And so there's some things where you're teaching, younger guys that are a little more green, and you have to kind of accelerate that whole thing and try and get them, get their feet under them much, much quicker, I think, than a lot of teams in the NFL would do. Like sometimes you'll give a rookie just a year to just kind of learn. And you can't really do that in college quite as much unless they're redshirting or whatever. But I would just say, simplifying everything, having the ability to, teach your players and kind of accelerate that teaching, ability to get them on the field much, much quicker. I think that's just going to be, an advantage here, especially trying to get all these guys on the same page, get Geno on the same page with those receivers. And so I just think at the college game, the teaching is a little bit different. And I know this is exactly what we're going to talk about with like Mike McDonald. Like he's all about simplifying calls and teaching the players the holistic view of the defense rather than like, here's your job, your specific, what you're going to be doing. So I think there's just there could be a lot of advantages for, these guys that are coming out of the college game in terms of just accelerating the teaching program.
Rob mentioned Sam Howell, and there's obviously some tangible excitement from the 12s out there because this is a 23-year-old quarterback with 18 NFL starts under his belt. And there's a lot of optimism, at least for some fans out there, that Howell may be the future for the Seahawks. But we were talking about this on our show yesterday, that there are a lot of stats out there that suggest Geno Smith is getting not enough love, not even close to enough love from Seattle's fans. And then you look at this offense that Ryan Grubb's running. Michael Penix, the last 2 years, was one of the best quarterbacks in the entire country, a top 10 pick for the Atlanta Falcons. And you can correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, but it feels like these two quarterbacks, Michael Penix and Geno Smith, that there's a lot that you can look at in terms of parallels with their playing style, their strengths. How do you see that helping Geno Smith fit into this offense? And just how do you see the fit in general with what we've seen from Michael Penix, what he did the last 2 years for Ryan Grubb?
I mean, I think stylistically, they're definitely similar. Both are very aggressive, like to, attack downfield, vertical offense. I think quick processing and knowing where to go with the football are two, I guess like traits that they both share, Michael Penix and Geno Smith. I actually compared Penix to Smith in my draft guide, just because I think if you look at like the pressure to sack rate for both of these players, it's very, very low. They generally speaking have a very good ability to know where they're going to go with the football, make their reads, quickly move through the progressions and pass downfield aggressively. And so stylistically, they do remind me a little bit of each other. And I think, Geno Smith feels like a really good fit for this Ryan Grubb offense because of all the things I said before, like, getting through your reads quickly, attacking downfield. If you don't see it right away, like checking down and kind of like getting a shorter, easier play. I think there's always like this option in that offense where you either, attack downfield or just get rid of the football quickly and move on to the next play. And I think Geno has that processing ability to like run this offense with a lot of efficiency. I think last year he got into trouble, a few too many picks. I think that really soured some fans on what he was doing. But to me, I'm like, he's not taking a lot of sacks. He's getting the football to his playmakers. He's attacking downfield. He's making some incredible throws. And I just think generally speaking, there's just like expectations for what the Seahawks could have at quarterback are too high. Like Geno Smith is a really good quarterback. Like count your blessings a little bit. Like it's hard to find a really good quarterback. And everyone's trying to get rid of him so quickly. I just, think he could be the type of player that could really lead them deep into the playoffs. Assuming, he's not necessarily an elite guy, but that doesn't mean he's worthless. It doesn't mean you should move on from him really like right away. So that's kind of my take on Geno. I think he's a good player. I think he could certainly lead them to the playoffs and get them some playoff wins. And, to me, that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, no question about it. And Danny, you just took some of the words right out of my mouth there, because you're kind of talking about with like the pressure rate, for example, with Michael Penix and Geno Smith, and how that is kind of similar. I wonder if the Huskies didn't have the Joe Moore winning offensive line of the year. Penix led the country in passing yards. Roma Dunze led the country in receiving yards. If the Huskies don't get to the national championship, and again, if they don't have the pass protection they have, they allowed on average less than a sack a game. That's mind-boggling.
Yeah,
that to me is one of the questions I have about Ryan Grubb's offense going to the NFL. And do you think that his scheme, is that something that you believe that the Seahawks can replicate? Again, the quarterback position, as you just mentioned, Geno Smith and Michael Penix have some similarities. I love the system and all the different kind of just outlet passes, late developing outlet passes. But it's kind of, I don't mean to make a joke of it. Ryan Grubb, of course, was at the University of Washington and Fresno State. So the Huskies and the Bulldogs. Do the Seahawks have the dogs up front to be able to protect Geno Smith?
Yeah, obviously that's a huge question, and it just depends on our guys can be healthy. Like, I really like Charles Cross when he's healthy. I think he could be a top level left tackle. I think that their interior offensive line, the right tackle, they were platooning last year. Like, the health just didn't really line up for them. Didn't really give them the opportunity to have a lot of continuity on the offensive line. Like, we've seen like studies done. Continuity on the offensive line is so important, because these guys are playing next to each other. It's like they're all tied to a string. They all got to work together. It's so crucial. And the Seahawks just did not have that at all last year. And so I think, in theory, this could be a really good offensive line. But again, we're just going to have to see guys stay healthy and stay on the field. I like the fact that they, solidified their depth quite a bit this offseason by signing a few guys. They addressed this position in the draft. I liked the guys that they took in the draft. I thought they got a great value on Christian Haynes. And so, theoretically, this could be a lot better. This could be a huge improvement. But of course, best laid plans, it all has to kind of go to plan, and the guys have to stay healthy for I think that to succeed. But I will say, they did win the Joe Moore Award, and obviously there's no question this is a really good offensive line. But again, if you go back to the pressure to sack rate, that is a quarterback stat too. It's an ability to get rid of the football when you're under pressure. You have, where your outlet is, what, you see all the pieces on the board, and you can get rid of the football and avoid a sack. Those sacks are backbreaking. We saw that for so many years with Russell Wilson. Like, sacks can end a drive before it starts. And so that's one of the things I really love about Geno. And I think this is why it translates pretty well, is even if this offensive line isn't elite, it's not like a top tier offensive line next year, I think he always knows where to go with the football for the most part. He has one of the lower pressure sack rates in the NFL. And so I think that really is something to keep in mind here, that he, generally speaking, knows where to go with the football. And they can design a system. Ryan Grubb can design a system where he knows where his outlet is, and they can just get rid of the ball, check it down, and live to play another down.
When we return, we're going to continue diving into this new look offense with Ryan Grubb, more specifics on how some of the players on Seattle's offense are going to fit in to this scheme. Don't go away. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Locked On Seahawks is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in your day? For me, I wish I had a little bit more time to paint horror movie models. You can see the critter and the gremlin in the background behind me. The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. And therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You can fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make more time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/LockedOn. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at BetterHelp.com/LockedOn. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s tuning in. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week, especially when we kick off our training camp storylines preview. We've got the Ringer's Danny Kelly here formerly of Field Goals as well, to dive into Ryan Grubb's offense. And now we're going to start taking a look at some of the players and where they fit in. And Danny, the first thing that I want to get to here in this segment, we're looking at some of the individual players.
Mm-hmm.
Rob and I kind of disagreed on this, or I don't even say disagree, but we had different perspectives on what the Seahawks were going to do with Noah Fant. I was assuming that they were probably going to try to bring back Colby Parkinson, and Fant, it just seemed like the last couple of years, it's almost felt like one of those round peg, square hole fits. It just hasn't necessarily worked. And yet Seattle gave him a deal, $10.5 million for the next 2 years, even though he didn't score a touchdown last year. There's been so much talk about Washington's receivers, but if you watch the Huskies closely, Ryan Grubb got his tight ends involved a lot in the passing game the last couple of years. So how do you see Noah Fant fitting into this offense? Do you like the fit with him teaming up with Ryan Grubb? And what does he need to do to really maximize Fant to make this contract they just gave him a worthwhile investment?
I mean, just for starters, play him more than like 50% of the snaps. That will help. Because I think obviously Fant has been a little bit disappointing for the Seahawks, for Seahawks fans, I guess, just because they had three good guys in Will Dissly, Colby Parkinson, Noah Fant, and they were basically platooning him. Obviously, from my point of view, I've covered fantasy football during the year. It just like makes him useless from a fantasy point of view because he's only playing 40 to 50% of the snaps. And so when you have a three-person, platoon at tight end, that obviously hurts the guy's upside. It hurts their bottom line. So obviously just getting him out there 80% of snaps, like his production could spike really significantly just because he's playing all those snaps and he's getting all those targets. And I think he will be that type of player who's playing most of the time. And so, obviously that's the first thing, but I think just from a big picture point of view, he's still young, very athletic guy, and everything is relative. I always say this, he's very athletic, but he is a elite athlete. Like he has the ability to run after the catch. He can get up the seam. We've seen it. He has, I think that rare athleticism that they really still haven't tapped into. Tight ends a lot of the time end up like breaking out quite a bit later. We saw this with like David Njoku last year. I think Fant has always flashed, but never just really put it together, whether that was a result of circumstances. I think last year, certainly it was just circumstances dictated. They were rotating three guys the whole year. This year it should be his job. And I think, I like him theoretically in this offense. Like I said before, they utilized screens quite a bit. I think they can get him going in the screen game, do a lot of creative things with him that way. With DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, JSN, drawing defense and teams fearing those three guys in the passing game, it's going to open up a lot of things for him, like up the seam. I was actually just watching some cut-ups of Ryan Grubb's offense. It's actually for a Alabama blog. They thought he was coming to Alabama. And so they did a little bit of, sorry, that sucks for them, but useful background. There was one play where, Rome Odunze was running like a vertical route, two safeties kind of collapsed on him. And then Westover or whatever ran like an out route and he was just wide open. I think like that kind of idea where teams are collapsing on the Seahawks superstar players. I don't think Noah Fant is going to be like a 100 target player probably in this offense, but because there's just too many good receivers. You got Lockett, Metcalf, and JSN. Those guys are probably going to be 1, 2, 3 in terms of targets. But I think Fant as a big play threat, a guy that they can run some league plays with, some screens with. I think he's going to be a big part of their offense, and I think he can really take advantage of playing more snaps this year.
Well, and you mentioned fantasy football, so I have to go down that route. Otherwise, people are going to go nuts in the comments here, Danny. So I hate using the expression "gun to your head," but here we are in July 2nd. Give me your firework. Call your shot a little bit here for a second. Who do you think is going to lead the Seahawks in receptions and touchdowns? And same thing with the running backs. Who's going to lead in rushing yards and touchdowns, sir?
I mean, I think DK Metcalf feels like the Odunze role in this offense, I think, in terms of if you're just like projecting what the Huskies did last year, how they spread the ball out. I think he's kind of the Odunze guy. And then JSN feels a little bit more like the McMillan type of receiver, is probably going to be playing in the slot for the most part. I think McMillan played like 90-something% of his snaps in the slot. And so it would not be surprising if JSN can stay healthy. He's going to probably end up being second on the team in targets, because I think a lot of this stuff goes to the middle of the field with that offense. And again, like I say, like some of these like delayed screens, some of these like inside screens, tunnel screens. I think like when I picture this offense, it's like a lot of deep shots and a lot of like quick hitters. And I think JSN can be that guy that gets open early, settles into the soft spot in the defense. And, he becomes a much bigger part of this offense. Because last year, as much as I appreciate what Waldron did for the most part with the Seahawks over the last few years, like his plan for JSN was like, I don't have a plan for JSN. Let's get him in here and run a screen. Like, he didn't utilize him at all. Yeah. And I hope that's not because JSN is not good. I just think that was just kind of, they had Lockett, they had DK, and it wasn't like a big priority for them to get, JSN going. And so, hopefully this is different this year. And I think JSN has a chance to really explode. So I think he's kind of that McMillan guy. I know when McMillan was healthy with the Huskies, he was a high volume guy.
Yep.
And so that's kind of how I picture this. And then of course Lockett can kind of do it all, but I could see his targets kind of tapering off a little.
Now that you've mentioned all the receivers, we got to go to the run game. And we can't go without talking about the run game. And everybody knows the explosive passing game that Washington had, but they were very efficient running the football. They had 1,000-yard rusher last year in Dylan Johnson. And I find it fascinating. To me, this is the biggest mystery with Ryan Grubb's offense coming to the NFL. It's not the passing game. There will be some differences from college, but the run game, 4 of the 5 years he was an offensive coordinator, heavy zone usage. They were a heavy zone running teams. And then last year, they just completely flipped to a gap team, 56% of their runs being gap runs. And you look at the personnel that they've now got. This is something I'm a running back guy. I'm a run game guy. And even I'm kind of wondering, what are we going to see from this run game? Is it going to be more gap centric, zone centric? How do the two backs that have different styles fit into this? It just feels like there's kind of a hodgepodge of guys up front that makes it a little bit tricky to figure out what type of team this is going to be stylistically running the football.
Yeah. I mean, your guess is as good as mine on that one. I think, I've been a huge Kenneth Walker guy. Like, I just think he's so talented. It's so explosive. His ability to break tackles and create on his own. I just think he's honestly, the elite class in terms of just pure runner in the NFL. I know that some people are, and this is a legitimate gripe, I think, but like he's sort of a boomer bust type of runner. Like a lot of times he'll get kind of bogged down in the backfield, try and bounce a play when he probably should not, and things like that. I think there's probably some of that had to do with like the offensive line and their ability to like get protection up front. But I'm a huge Kenneth Walker fan, and I think he's one of the better pure runners in the NFL. That being said, like Charbonnet is just absolutely like the tough as nails. Like he reminds me of Dylan Johnson, honestly. Like, so I could see some, I could see Grubb kind of falling for him and like saying this is the type of guy I want. Like he's going to go from A to B and get me the 3-4 yards that we really want here, and kind of like go with that. So I could see it like a bigger rotations or like committee approach this year than when we saw last year. Obviously, like Kenneth Walker dominated touches last year. I bet we'll see a little bit more Charbonnet, if not a lot more Charbonnet this year. But that being said, like I'm still kind of a Kenneth Walker truther. Like I just think he's incredible runner, and it would be silly to like not give him the ball a lot. But that's just me. I think we could probably see Charbonnet inherit quite a bit bigger role this year than maybe some people in fantasy want him to.
Yeah, and my last question for you, Danny, and again, thank you so much, is we can't have the show and not talk draft at least a little bit. I know that you gave the selection of Byron Murphy II an A+, and I agree. Is there any of Seattle's other picks that you really, really liked and think that they're just destined for immediate success, or any selections that you kind of left you scratching your head a little bit?
I mean, obviously, love Byron Murphy. I mentioned it before. The Christian Haynes pick, I think, was great value where they got him. He's a really athletic, really tough, physical. Like he's got the size, the movement skills. I feel like I'm a little rusty because I haven't looked at these guys in a couple months. I've been like, I turned the page from the draft. I'm like trying to remember my scouting report on him, but I remember being very, very high on him. Just from a like skill set point of view, I think he fits what the Seahawks want to do perfectly. I think he could drop in and be a starter from day one for them. So I think that was a massive, massive value for where they got him. Honestly, AJ Barner, I think, is pretty good. He's we talked about the committee that they had at the tight end position last year, and I think AJ Barner will come in and just be like, he's going to play his role as a blocker, from the get go. That'll open up things for even if they are playing 12 personnel. or 2 tight end sets or 3 tight end sets or whatever have you. He's still, I think Fant is going to be allowed to go do his thing as a route runner and get yards after the catch and all that stuff. And that'll, I think Barner could kind of open things up for him. I admit I didn't like dig deep into Tyrese Knight before the draft. That was a little bit surprising to me that they picked him that high. But when I went in and watched him after the draft, I was pretty impressed. Obviously linebacker is tough to project from the college game to the pros, just because I think they ask you a lot of different things from you in the NFL versus what they're doing kind of just like run and chase in college. But I think he had great athleticism, plays really, really hard. He has an incredible wingspan, which I think is very intriguing, just from it's like the KJ Wright for all those years was like his wingspan played a big part of why he was so good and why he was able to get like his hands up into passing lanes and why he could make tackles that seemingly were out of his range. And so I think he's a really fun, developmental guy. I don't know if he's necessarily going to be a starter this year, but I think he has a lot of potential. So I coming back after not really knowing a ton about him in the pre-draft phase, I came back and I was like, yeah, I could see why they like that. It sounds like that was a McDonald guy. So that's also intriguing just to see what he saw from him. So when it comes to like the mid rounds, I thought, Nehemiah Pritchett and DJ James, that seems like pretty good value for both of those guys. And obviously, corner wasn't like a huge need, but getting depth at corner, you can never have too many corners. So I like those 2 picks. So there was not really a pick I hated. So I can't really say I didn't like any picks other than I think Tyrese Knight kind of was surprising how high he went.
Oh no, here come the listeners saying, what about this homer? He didn't have any that he didn't like. Oh, no. Danny, as always, we greatly appreciate having you on. And before we let you go, real quick, just gonna put you on the spot. How many wins does this football team get with Mike McDonald?
9.
9. That seems to be. It kind of feels like we're in a Jeff Fisher cycle here, but at least
that's good. That's good in my mind. Get 9-10 wins, and that's solid.
At least gives you a chance to get to the playoffs. Yeah. As always, man, we greatly appreciate it, and look forward to having you back on sometime here on Locked On Seahawks.
Absolutely appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, Danny.
When we come back, we are going to be looking at our 90-man countdown. We've got our next 3 players, including Jonathan Hankins coming over with Aden Durde. Don't go away. You're listening to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. And a special thanks to our friend, Danny Kelly of The Ringer, for dropping by and dishing out his Seahawks and NFL knowledge. Always a blast to have him on the show. Rob, let's switch gears. We're now on our 90-man countdown, and we are down to the 44 to 42 range. And so we've got some interesting players that could have big roles for the Seahawks this season. And speaking of big, we can say figuratively and literally here, Jonathan Hankins coming in first here on today's podcast. And the Seahawks signed him from the Dallas Cowboys. They list him at 330. This guy is much bigger than 330 pounds. If you've seen him play, he is a big dude, takes up a lot of space, but he's surprisingly adept at getting after quarterbacks. He had 3 sacks last year playing for Aden Durde, the new defensive coordinator. He was the D-line coach in Dallas. He's had a few other years that he's had more than 5 sacks in the NFL. So for being a big nose tackle type, he's played some 3-tech. He's had some pass rushing ability. Don't expect a bunch of sacks from him at the same time. There's a reason he's been with a starting lineup. This isn't just a space-eating run stuffer.
Well, I think he's not just a space-eating run stuffer, but even if that was all that he is, then I'd be pretty happy with that too, because I think that he does that job incredibly well. He's done it at a high level for a long time, and this is a former second-round pick. He's played at the Giants, he's played at the Cowboys, they stayed in the division. It's always interesting to me when guys move within the division. That just suggests to me that the opponents know the player is a very effective one, and so the fact again that Aden Durde of course, played a role in the Seahawks bringing in Jonathan Hankins. I love the fact that you mentioned the sack production. I also think about what the Dallas Cowboys had, of course, Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence. They had some pretty dominant outside guys as well. So it made it a little bit easier, in my opinion. So I don't think that we're going to see Hankins put up a bunch of sacks. And as you said as well, I do fully expect Jonathan Hankins to seize that nose guard position in the middle and be able to significantly help the Seahawks from that run defense that finished 31st in the NFL a year ago. It's size, it's strength, it's awareness. It's that same reach that Danny just highlighted with Tyrese Knight, the linebacker that the Seahawks drafted. Jonathan Hankins is just a massive, massive human being. And considering the way that most of the offenses in the NFC West are a little bit more tailored to the passing game, again, I don't think that Jonathan Hankins is going to lead the Seahawks defensive linemen in tackles, but I do think that his placement in the middle of Seattle's defense is going to make them much more formidable against the run.
And the nice thing, as I mentioned, I know he's getting to be a little bit older player now, well into his 30s, but he has played a lot of snaps at 3-tech and 4-eye. Yep. So it's not like he has only been a nose tackle. He has played thousands of snaps lined up as a more traditional DT, and he's had success in those positions. So we talk about the versatility. Baltimore had some big dudes that they could do that with. Michael Pierce can play a little bit all over the line. So if Jonathan Hankins can provide them even a little bit of versatility as a starter that's mainly going to be playing nose tackle, that is only going to help this football team. And I anticipate his presence is going to be a big part of getting this run defense turned around, as you mentioned. Now let's go to the flash on offense. And I'm not calling Jake Bobo the Flash because that would not be the superhero that he probably fits the mold of, not known for his speed, but at the same time, what an impressive rookie year. Yes. Jake Bobo had as an undrafted free agent coming out of UCLA, 19 catches, had a couple of touchdown catches during the year. He had a touchdown run near the goal line on a jet sweep. That was something I never thought I would see from Jake Bobo. And the run blocking. He was maybe the best run blocker on the outside for the Seahawks last year, and that includes DK Metcalf. I thought he was fantastic in the run game, played some special teams for the Seahawks as well. There were a lot of people going into this season saying, new coaching staff, I'm not feeling confident about Jake Bobo being able to make this team again. He's got to completely impress a new coaching staff. He's starting from scratch, just like everybody else is. But I have seen nothing on the practice field that suggests to me that this coaching staff has him on a bubble at all. I think that he is very much on this roster. And once the pads come on, I think he's going to look even better because this is a guy that he might not have blazing speed, but there are players that are slower with pads on. Jake Bobo is not that way, and his soft hands, his blocking skills, all the intangibles he brings to the table. Ryan Grubb, I think, is going to love this guy, and so I think he is very much penciled in as that number 4 receiver.
I have to agree with you. And the scout in me remains skeptical. I still see a guy that just doesn't have much juice. And I think, how is this going to fit into an offense that we just talked about with Danny is built on explosive plays? And yet you watch Jake Bobo, and he is just such an incredibly instinctive player. He just, it's like the game is slower for him, and it's kind of ironic because, again, the biggest question mark about him is that 40-yard dash time. But it's like he sees the play developing before it actually takes place. And so whether it be his ability to pluck the ball, sense a defender coming in to try and swipe at it, he's already moved the ball, protected his body, and is, spinning off of that contact to create yardage after the hit. And again, that's something that you don't expect for a guy who doesn't have elite burst to him. The special teams acumen, the run blocking, you mentioned the jet sweep. I mean, the guy just does a very well in so many different things that he's one of those guys that, I think that the coaches are going to absolutely fall in love with. The scouts are still going to have their questions, but it doesn't matter what the scouts say anymore. This is going to be about what Mike McDonald and obviously Ryan Grubb have to feel about what Jake Bobo is able to bring to the field. And that's the thing, is it brings as much, we talked about before, we believe that he has the softest hands on the field. I think that he's the most instinctive receiver that the Seahawks have, one of their best all-around players. So yes, I feel at this point, Jake Bobo is absolute lock to take as a roster spot this year, and I did not see that coming. But he has proven that he's a terrific football player who is better than the sum of his parts.
Going from a rookie who vastly exceeded expectations to a second-round pick who didn't meet expectations, at least for most fans. Derek Hall had a pretty quiet first season in Seattle, didn't have a single sack, only 5 quarterback hits, but he did have almost 40 tackles. And going back and watching a lot of these games in all 22 again, there was more quality play from Derek Hall than I think a lot of fans are giving him credit for. It didn't result in sacks. Not a lot of pressures. The pass rushing aspect, that was what was most disappointing. But as far as run defense goes, there were some bad plays, but there were also some plays where, including the Ravens game in the second half, he had a couple of tackles for loss in that game where you saw some of those splash plays, but the consistency was not there. I still believe in the talent that Derek Hall has, the motor that he plays with. And I think that Mike Macdonald, this defense, I think they're going to have a better idea of how to maximize him. It did feel like at times last year that the Seahawks coaching staff didn't necessarily know how to fit him into their scheme and try to maximize his skill set. And I think that was part of the reason that he struggled so much when he had his opportunities. Now, he's going to have to prove himself to a new coaching staff. He's got to show that he's got more juice than he showed in the regular season tape last year, particularly in the pass rushing aspect. But the talent is there. We've seen it against top college competition. We've seen the motor. We know the backstory for this kid. He's an easy one to root for. He is one that really is a wild card for me that could be a top candidate for a sophomore breakout just because of the coaching staff change and the scheme change.
No, I agree. Again, I agree with you. I think that there is a possibility here for a sophomore breakout. I don't know that we're ever going to see Derek Hall become a top-notch sack guy. And because there's so many out there who that's all they base any evaluation off of defensive linemen and front seven defenders is, did they get sacks? And I just don't know that that's Derek Hall's game. But he plays with a level of violence, Corbin, that to me is only matched on the Seahawks front by, Uchenna Nwosu and Jaron Reed. And there is just violence with his hands. We've heard heavy hands before, LJ Collier and all that kind of stuff. But this young man does play with that. He's just mean. He's nasty. He does not stay blocked for very often. And I think that now that you have a system that is going to be a little bit more versatile and allow Derek Hall to be able to move around a little bit more and just his own familiarity, his own comfort. I do think that we are going to see Derek Hall continue to prove that he is somebody the Seahawks can rely on as part of the rotation. Again, not necessarily a frontline starter, but definitely somebody part of the rotation that hopefully creates the waves that the Seahawks need to bring back to Seattle.
As always, you can follow me on X at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow, we'll be joined by another special guest. We are going to flip over to the defense and take a close look at Seattle's unheralded linebacker group heading into the 2024 season. You won't want to miss it. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and thanks for tuning in. Go Hawks.